Had we known how dangerous this chemical was when we started to make it 70 years ago, we would have done something about restricting its manufacture and use then.
Dr. David Carpenter of the University at Albany has been studying perfluorooctanoic acid, commonly known as PFOA, for decades. He's among the first who warned of health risks.
We had all those warning signs, and yet nobody paid attention.
PFOA has been used in the manufacturing of oil and water repellent and nonstick products since World War II. Everyday items from cookware to fashion and cleaners to makeup were manufactured using this chemical. PFOA also ended up in the local drinking water, and there's no consolidated list of where it's been used.
There had been animal toxicity studies going back to the 1950s and 1960s.
Rob Ballot is the attorney who discovered some companies knew PFOA posed serious health risks to people and was lethal to animals about 60 years ago.
Rat studies, dog studies, monkey studies, and in fact even monitoring of workers had begun in the 1970s.
The EPA issued a health advisory for how much exposure a person should have. Any measurement above 70 parts per trillion is cause for alarm. Kevin Allard learned there was a serious contamination problem in his hometown of Hoosick Falls, New York. The groundwater near an industrial plant that used PFOA measured alarming levels of the chemical.
The contamination was at 18,000 parts per trillion. 18,000 parts per trillion.
In our nationwide investigation, we've identified over 1,900 locations, water systems, military bases, fire training areas, civilian airports, and industrial plants that have known or possible contamination by PFOA and sister chemicals, including PFOS. Hundreds of locations have shocking levels of contamination, some as high as 21 million parts per trillion, 300,000 times greater than the EPA limit of 70. Because of known health risks, the EPA put its review of PFOA on the fast track. Sort of.
In 2002, the EPA said it would conduct a priority review, and 17 years later, it's not been completed.
Correct. The priority review, to my understanding, is still underway.
The EPA administrator did not respond to our request for an interview. PFOA and PFOS were phased out of manufacturing in 2015, but they're not gone from public use. The chemicals are in a firefighting foam widely used to smother fires. Proposals to replace toxic chemicals in that foam with sister chemicals has critics worried.
We should not be replacing them with sister chemicals. They're very likely to have identical adverse health effects. Yes, we should be concerned.
All locations where these two chemicals leaked into drinking water is not fully known. Sample testing has shown contamination in large public water systems nationwide. However, very few of the thousands of smaller water systems have been tested. Private wells haven't been tested at all. More than 80 million Americans, about 1 in 4, get their water from these sources. Allard believes installing water filters is not enough.
Who wants to drink remediated water out of a Superfund site? No, nobody.
Because it's not biodegradable, PFOA poses an ongoing threat to people, animals, and the environment. Earlier this year, all 4,000 cows at a New Mexico dairy farm had to be euthanized because they were poisoned by PFOA from nearby Cannon Air Force Base. And contaminated water can be very easy to find. Drive about 15 minutes east of Hoosick Falls and you enter Vermont, where they have PFOA in the water from yet another contamination source.
You know, I think a lot of us in the United States assume, you know, when we turn on that tap, that somebody has already made sure this is safe. And unfortunately, what we've learned, that's not necessarily the case.
For Inside Your World Investigates, I'm Mark Hyman in Bennington, Vermont.